Hey guys, it's Natural Progressive. Thank you guys for coming for this much anticipated interview. I know many of you are huge fans of Derrick Jensen, who doesn't need much of an introduction. We know he's an author and an eco-philosopher and has done some amazing work for the environmental community. I'm really, really pleased to have him here. But first, I'm sorry, I'm going to make you wait for just a second. I have a couple of thank yous to give out. Number one to Osama, number five, who generously gave me a donation uh, through CashMe, which is a really, really quick, easy, secure app if you want to do the one-time donation. And Amalia, my new Patreon, thank you so much for your support. You've allowed me, both of you, all of you have allowed me to schedule some new internet service. So hopefully I don't have any more freezing problems after Saturday. Anyway, thank you very much for being here. And I'd like to introduce, well, y'all know him, y'all love him. Derrick Jensen is here. Will you say hi? Um, so I'm hoping you're okay with talking about your book. I know you have several books. The End Game is fabulous. Um, I wish I had time to read the whole book, but I've I've tried to find out as much about it as possible because the topic is really um, quite difficult for a lot of people to understand, and it's the myth of human supremacy. And it really resonates with me. It's something that I've thought about my entire life, but it was unheard of to talk about, uh, especially in this state where humans do reign supreme. And you can't talk about animal rights at all because that means you're discounting humans. So I'm really hoping to talk about that, and I am going to give you the majority of the floor because this is such a short period of time to cover such a deep topic. Please, would you explain the premises? And that's kind of a reference to your end game, but will you please talk?
I was getting in the car and he wouldn't bother to get up. But I didn't have car keys in my hand. Then he knew I was going home. And the point is that this took me a year to figure out something that took him just not very long.
Yeah,
And
they're smart.
so the point was that we have these conversations all the time, but we don't talk about them in public. So that was originally what that book was supposed to be about. I tried to write it for about a year and I couldn't do it. And finally, the reason that I realized I couldn't do it is because I realized that what I really wanted to talk about is before you can exploit somebody, you have to silence them. Before you can exploit, Robert J. Lifton has written just tremendous work about the psychology of genocide. And one of the things he talks about is how before you can commit any mass atrocity, you have to convince yourself and others that what you're doing is not, in fact, an atrocity, but instead a good thing. So the Nazis weren't, according to themselves, perpetrating genocide and mass murder and waging aggressive war. They were instead purifying the Aryan race and gaining the necessary Lebensraum they needed to fulfill their destiny. Of course, what they're really doing is committing mass murder and genocide. My point is just that no matter what we do, no matter how awful the thing is, we generally have it rationalized. And one of the ways that we can rationalize the destruction of the planet is by pretending that we are superior to everybody else and that nobody else fully subjectively exists. So, so many indigenous people have said to me that the fundamental difference between indigenous and Western ways of being is even the most open-minded Westerners generally perceive listening to the natural world as a metaphor, as opposed to the way the world actually is. And another way to put this is that most of us in the Western world have been taught to perceive the world as consisting of resources to be exploited, as opposed to other beings to enter into relationship with. And a really quick example of this, and then I'll shut up and you can ask another question, is that there's a great line by a Canadian lumberman: when I look at trees, I see dollar bills. And if when you look at trees, you see dollar bills, you're going to treat them one way. And if when you look at trees, you see trees, you'll treat them another way. And if when I look at this particular tree, I see this particular tree, I'll treat it differently still. And there was an article in the local newspaper, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, about why crabbers, I live on the coast, why crabbers work so hard during the crab season. And the newspaper article said every crab is worth about $1.50. And so just imagine that there are all these envelopes scattered all over the ground. Each one has $1.50 in it. You would run around as fast as you could picking up these envelopes, which is true if they were envelope stuff with $1.50. But the truth is that crabs aren't envelopes stuffed with $1.50. Crabs are other beings with lives as valuable to them as mine is to me and yours is to you. And if you start to perceive the world as consisting of other beings whose lives are as valuable to them as yours is to you and mine is to me, then that changes how you perceive everything. And so really the myth of human supremacy, if we were going to just boil it down to its essence, is simply that humans are just one species among many. And we're not particularly, I mean, we just are, just like everybody else. And, plants, so there are sections in the book where I talk about, excuse me, where I talk about the ways plants communicate and the ways plants, like for example, if a caterpillar starts to munch on a leaf, the plant will send out chemical messages. They don't have vocal cords, they don't speak like that, but they speak using chemicals. They will send out chemical messages to other plants saying, hey, there are some caterpillars here who are eating us. So you might change the chemical composition of your leaves to make it less palatable to the caterpillars. And sorry, I said this before, but
oh, is that your dog?
my mom's house. And
it's okay. We love animals here. It's all good.
Hey, that's enough. That's enough. I saw this cartoon one time of it consisted of a human and a dog with little thought arrows, and the dog the human kept going, quit barking, quit barking, quit barking, and the dog was saying, quit yelling, quit yelling, quit yelling.
That's so true, though. People yell at the dogs to get them to stop barking, and they're thinking they need to bark more.
Yeah. Anyway,
they're joining in.
the plants, the plants can communicate with other plants to say, hey, you might change your chemical composition. We're being eaten by caterpillars. And it was so interesting because there were some scientists who were studying this, and they said, well, this doesn't make any sense. Why would a plant expend energy warning other plants about a threat? That makes no sense and doesn't have any survival value. And I told that to my niece, who responded, don't these people understand anything about community? That plants, this is like warning your neighbor that a flood's coming. This is like warning your neighbor. Right. It's like neighborhood watch. It's no different than neighborhood watch. Hey, there's some caterpillars coming, watch out. These plants communicate with each other because they understand that a forest consists not just of cedar trees, but also redwood trees, willows, alders, salal, huckleberry. It consists of this entire community. And they're communicating. And that's one of the things, apart from killing the planet, which is the biggest thing, that's another thing that all of this costs us, is participation in what Thomas Berry called the Great Liturgy. I mean, the great prayer, the great community. It's like Divine Gloria said to me that, nature is not red in tooth and claw, where the purpose is to be the best capitalist and to exploit everybody the best you can. The point of life is to recognize that there is this tremendous symphony, this beautiful symphony going on, and to find out what is your proper role and to play that role in the symphony at the proper time.
Yeah, but humans aren't really good at that. I mean, have they ever been really, really good at harmonizing with nature, being a part of that symphony?
Who?
at any point in time, humans. I mean, I guess some indigenous people have, but but we've been really driving animals to extinction for quite a while in our history.
Well, I'm not saying that every indigenous nation is perfect. What I can
Mhm.
say is that the Tolowa, that's the people on whose land I live here, the Tolowa lived here for 12,500 years. They're carbon dated to at least 12,500 years ago. And when the early Europeans arrived, the the Klamath River just south of here was so full of salmon that it was black and roiling. And they lived here for 12,000 years without destroying the place. Again, I'm not saying that they are perfect. I'm not saying elephants are perfect. I'm not saying
Yeah.
orangutans
No,
are perfect.
nothing's perfect.
But
That's for
but
but indigenous people tend to think seven generations ahead, where our culture thinks right now. What can we get right now?
well, that's the thing is if you perceive yourself, it's like the historian Ray Raphael wrote this really good line about how yes, indigenous people would burn fires and burn forests in California. They would affect the land. But here's the thing. This is not sort of this cosmic woo-woo thing, although maybe. The real point is that if you're planning on living in place for the next 500 years, you're going to make different land use decisions than if you're not.
Mhm.
And if you're planning on living here for the next 500 years, then you will not kill off the salmon. That doesn't make
Right.
any sense. And um, so there's where some of that starts. Again, uh, I'm not saying that every or any indigenous culture was perfect. I'm simply saying that we know that the Tolowa lived here for 12,000 years, and we know that the dominant culture has been here for 200, and the place is trashed.
Right. Okay, just a quick note. At 45 minutes after quarter two, we will start taking questions for Derrick and comments. So just hold off anything you want to say for us to read. Until then, I just want to make sure that Derrick gets as much out as possible. There's no way we can cover all of his wisdom, all of his really, really interesting concepts that, yeah, that we all love. So, um, and maybe some of you don't, I don't know, but we're all people with different opinions. So, moving on with that, I just wanted to get your opinion. During another interview I had, not during the interview, but after I received this comment, and I think it goes a long ways to, oh no, not only like human supremacy, but just people's attitudes that I just want you to comment on this. I couldn't bring myself to comment on it because I would have been really rude. And I don't want to do that because this person is obviously suffering, and what they're going through is wrong too. But this person commented, white people always feel for animals. How about compassion for the humans' lives that you have ruined around the world? What would you say to someone like that? I'm just really curious because I had no idea how to even begin to talk to that person about what's going on.
Well, first, um, I when I was talking about the uh, the crabs being living beings whose lives are as valuable to them as mine is to me and yours is to you. One of the examples I was going to use, I said, if when I look at this particular tree, I see this particular tree, then I'll treat it one way, and if I look at this particular tree, I see dollars on the branch, then I'm going to treat it differently. It's one of the reasons why I'm such a strong opponent of pornography is
Mhm.
because one of the things that pornography does is it facilitates men treating women as orifices. And if men perceive women as orifices, they're going to treat them one way. And
Mhm.
when they treat, if when they perceive women, they'll treat them differently. If when they perceive this particular woman, they perceive this particular woman, they'll treat her differently still. So what I'm really talking about is a supremacist attitude of any sort is going to lead to the perception of the other, the one perceived as inferior, as a resource. And this is absolutely true whether we're talking about a white person perceiving an African as someone to be potentially enslaved, or whether we're talking about perceiving trees as 4 feet of timber. And this is the problem that I see that unites all of these is a supremacist perspective that puts white males, and especially white males who write books, especially me, that puts white males at the top of a heap. The problem is the existence of the heap itself.
Mm.
And the problem is the perception that the heap exists, and the perception that the heap exists actually turns it into it has effects in the real world. That's the whole point, that I don't care how somebody perceives some other if it didn't ramify into the real world, but it does. And having said that, I don't, one of the great things about everything being so messed up is no matter where you look, there's really great work to be done. And so I don't have a lot of patience for someone who says, oh my gosh, you're working on salmon issues. Instead, you should be working on some other issue. It's like I have a really good friend, Charlotte Watson, who used to run the battered women's program for the state of New York. And now she acts as an advocate for women in the state judicial system. And she does wonderful, wonderful work. And I would never in a million years suggest to her that instead of working on trying to stop men's violence against women, that instead she try to work on salmon issues. That's the thing, is that no matter where you look, there's great work to be done, and find what you love and then defend your beloved. So if your primary issue is men's violence against women, work to stop men's violence against women. If your primary issue is protecting prairie dogs, then work to protect prairie dogs. And if your primary issue is stopping factory farming, then work to stop factory farming. If your primary issue is violence by police against African-American males, then work to stop that. Because the truth is, there is so much work that needs to be done. And there's not enough people doing it.
Right. I love what you say about that, finding the thing that you wish someone was doing and do it yourself. I heard you say that, and that is just huge to me, because that's kind of what I'm doing here. Is I'm not getting what I need as far as information. I'm an information addict, so I started doing this to bring on people that I wanted to interview and have these important discussions with, because it's not really widespread. So thank you so much for what you do and helping me do what I do, coming on here and doing that. That is just fabulous.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I think that that's a hugely important thing. One of the reasons that I write the books I do is because I saw this hole in discourse. I saw that there were books that I wanted to read that nobody was writing. And so instead of just complaining about, oh, why doesn't anybody write these books? My mom taught me right. She said that if you find a problem, solve it. You don't just sit there and complain about it. And so, I've got some heroes. Like, one of my heroes is Dar Jamail, who was just this normal guy living up in Alaska who did not like the corporate coverage of the US invasion of Iraq. And so instead of just complaining about it, he went over to Iraq and started doing better coverage himself. And I just love that. Or my friend Deanna Meyer, who was really upset because they were going to put in a shopping mall and kill a prairie dog community. And instead of just complaining about it, she went in and started working to protect the prairie dogs. So, all of my work, if I was going to condense all of my work into two things, one of them would be, this way of living is not sustainable. And when it's over, I would prefer that there was more of the natural world left than less. That's one part. And the other part is, again, find what you love and defend your beloved. Get off your butt and do something. The smartest thing I ever did was when I was in my 20s. I knew everything was messed up. I knew that this culture is killing the planet, but I didn't know what to do. And the problems are so big and I'm so small, I can't do anything. So I didn't do anything. I just sat around and complained. And then it occurred to me one day that I was not paying enough for gasoline, by which I meant that the amount I spent on gas did not cover the social and ecological costs of using that gas and refining, etc. And so for every dollar I would spend on gas, I started giving a dollar to a local, not national, a local environmental organization. But because I didn't have any money, instead I started paying myself $5 an hour to do activism. And what that did is it gave me a tangible way. So back at the time, gas was like 60 cents a gallon. And if I filled up my truck, it was $10. So if I fill up my truck once a week, that means I have to do 2 hours of activism. And I never allowed myself any excuse. It's like, okay, I'll write letters to the editor, but I was too scared to use my name, so I just made up fake names. Then later on, I started doing anti-fur demos, anti-circus demos. I went to an anti-circus demo. I didn't have a sign, but I didn't let that stop me. I love this line by Florence Nightingale. I attribute my success to the fact that I never gave nor accepted an excuse. And it was the same. I didn't allow myself any excuses. If I spend $10 on gas, I'm doing 2 hours activism, come no matter what. So I went to a circus demo. I just knew circuses are bad. I didn't know why. And they handed me a sign. I'm standing there with a sign that says circuses are bad. Some guy comes up to me and says, so why are circuses so bad? And I said, I don't know. Ask the guy next to me. You know, it's like I didn't let my ignorance stop me. I didn't let anything stop me. I did anti-military demos. And then, you know, the demos never accomplished anything, but they were kind of fun. And then I moved on from there to doing timber sale appeals. And then give me about 6 months or a year, and I was having so much fun with all the activism that I stopped keeping track of the time. And so the point is, get off your butt and do something.
I love that. I love that. But people are a little confused about what they need to be doing. I know you should definitely follow your passion, but I spent a lot of time fighting for the Green New Deal. And then when I looked into it a lot more, I found out that may not be the answer. Could you talk a little bit? I know you haven't mentioned that really specifically, but in Bright Green Lies, it's did you ever finish that book? Are you still working on
No, the book is
it?
out at publishers right now,
Okay. Because
and
I couldn't find it.
it's not out yet. It'll be out.
Okay.
Publishing takes a long time. Once a publisher accepts it, then it'll take about 9 months or a year.
Right.
And the core of that book, or part of the core of that book, is that there has been a tremendous coup in the environmental movement. That at one point, the environmental movement was about protecting wild places and wild beings. But at some point through the 80s and 90s, so much of the environmental movement became not about protecting wild places and wild beings, but continuing this destructive culture. Until now, you can have 100,000 people march on the streets of Paris or Washington, D.C. or New York City. And if you ask these people, why are you marching? They will say to protect the planet. But if you ask them for their specific demands, they will say, we want better subsidies for the solar and wind industries. And that's an extraordinary coup to have an entire social movement turned into a lobbying arm of a sector of industrial capitalism. And a lot
Right.
of the climate change activists are really clear about this. They will say, we're doing this to try to protect civilization. They're not saying we're doing this to protect black-footed ferrets or coho salmon or Pacific lampreys. They say they're doing this to protect this culture. And that's a whole different thing than they're attempting to protect the thing that is actually killing the planet.
Right. Right. And that's what my eyes were just very, 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 very recently opened up to is that fact that they're pushing the economy. The Green New Deal is all about is it's kind of based on the first New Deal, which really was destructive to the planet, building all the dams and bridges and everything. And when I realized how much that has actually damaged our planet, I'm at the point where I want to fight against the Green New Deal because I don't want to put all that energy into rebuilding the infrastructure and destroying more land through the mining of raw. raw materials and destroying the habitat of other animals, cutting down more forests, all the stuff it would take to actually do what they want. And I'm not sure if it's worth it. I mean, instead they're trying to save their lifestyle over the environment. And that's what's really bothering me with that.
Well, you have summed up in like 4 sentences what it took us 600 pages to say in a book. So
Thanks.
yeah, that's exactly it.
Right. Yeah, it's simple. I mean, to me, it's simple. Once you see it, it's simple. It's complicated at first when you're trying to navigate through all the stuff, but once you actually see it and you think what it's going to take to do everything, and you think, okay, wait, they need metal, so they're
Yep.
going to have to extract, or they're going to have to um, recycle it, which also takes a ton of energy. And no matter what they're doing, it's going to destroy even more of our biodiversity. So what we really need to do is gauge down the way we live and depopulate. We need to slowly depopulate. So I mean, hopefully we could do it faster, but I don't know.
Done
We
very
can't keep growing. I don't know.
the question of overpopulation could be handled without draconian means
Right.
very easily, because more than half of the children born right now are not actively wanted. So all you need to do is give women across the planet absolute reproductive freedom, and we've solved overpopulation. Except what, of course, that means is that you have to fight, these monotheistic Abrahamic religions.
And Mormons
Have to,
in my area.
and then you also have to fight capitalism's growth imperative, because it cracks me up in a very bad way. It makes me annoyed, is a better way to say this, that whenever they talk about overpopulation, they usually talk about Africa, South America, brown people who are non-industrialized. But then when you have birth rates go down in Japan or Russia, everybody freaks out, and all of a sudden they start giving sex holidays to have people go home, have sex to try to make more babies.
Yeah, because they can't grow the economy if they don't have more consumers.
Exactly. It's a big Ponzi scheme. And
Yeah.
one of the things, a good friend of mine is a doctor who always says that the first step toward proper treatment is correct diagnosis. And it's the same here, that if we can't talk about capitalism's growth imperative, then it's going to make all of our discussions about, for example, population or consumption or anything else completely insane, which is one of the reasons you are doing such important work. And one of the reasons that I just think that the work like yours is so incredibly vital, because we need to have voices countering that insanity. I remember when I was 26 or so, I was browsing in the Spokane library, and this book jumped off the shelf at me. It was Neil Evern's The Natural Alien. It was the first book I ever read that did not take as a given the idea that the entire planet was put here for us to use. And I still remember being 26 and just, it's a cliche, but it's like this huge weight went off my shoulders, because I suddenly realized, no, I'm not crazy. At least I'm not alone. I mean, the culture's crazy. I'm not crazy. And so it's so important to have people like Susan Griffin, Lewis Mumford, Neil Everton.
Deanna Meyer is awesome. Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
Deanna Meyer, just pumping her up because I did an interview with her and she is awesome. So
she's wonderful. It's so important to have people like that who are going against the mainstream voice that is saying again and again that the world was put here for us to use. Did you ever notice that whenever you see a mainstream article about some species going extinct or some species now becoming endangered, that the newspaper article always has to bring it back to how that will affect the economy?
right. And
that's nuts.
It is nuts. They always say economy stupid. It's the economy stupid. And whenever I hear that, I want to revert back. It's the ecology, stupid. That's what gave us life. It's the ecology. We not the economy that's important. It should be number one.
Well, yes, and what people don't seem to understand because they've been inculcated into believing the culture is more important than the planet is that without a planet, you don't have any social system whatsoever. So that's what all the so-called solutions to global warming have in common, which is they all take industrial capitalism as a given, and the natural world is having to conform to industrial capitalism. And that is literally insane in terms of being out of touch with physical reality. Because a without a social system, you have, I'm sorry, without a planet, you have no social system whatsoever. So obviously the planet has to be primary.
Right. Oh my gosh, I want to talk to you forever and ever. There's so many things that I want to discuss. We have 3 minutes before we need to start taking questions to keep us on our timeline. And I don't want to, keep you any longer than an hour just because I know what you're going through right now. So what final thoughts would you like to say if you wanted to continue your thought or anything? Sorry, I just had to put that out there so you know what time we're at
Right.
right now.
Um, yeah, I would if I were going to just sum it up, I would say that it's like my friend Lear Keith always says that if there are any humans who are alive 100 years from now, they're going to be asking, what the hell was wrong with us that we didn't fight like hell when the world was going down? And there is no more important thing that any of us can do than to try to protect the real world. It is, there's only one measure by which we'll be judged by those who come after. They're not going to care how we voted. They're not going to care whether we wrote books. They're not going to care whether we did this cool radio program. They're not, I mean, I'm including all of us. They're not going to care about anything. What they're going to care about is whether they can breathe the air and drink the water. They're going to
Right.
care whether the land can actually support them.
I'm
That's
going to actually care that I can still see wildlife and
exactly. And and so, you know, that's what we have to do um, is to resist this culture that is destroying all that is on this planet. And we need to, I keep thinking if I've been thinking this for decades that if Delta Smelt could take on human manifestation, what would they do? If coho salmon, Pacific lampreys, bald eagles, if they could take on human manifestation, what would they do? And another way that I think about this is if space aliens came down from outer space and they were doing to the planet what industrial capitalism is doing to the planet, if they were changing the climate, if they were putting dioxin in every mother's breast milk, if they were vacuuming the oceans. I mean, there are solid scientists who are talking about the oceans being devoid of fish in 30 years. That's not me. That's solid scientists. And, and we should be freaking out.
I'm
And
freaking out.
I am freaking out too. But most people are like, I wonder who's going to win March Madness. And
That's unbelievable, right?
and I like sports. I like sports a lot, but that doesn't alter the fact that it's a game, and it's less important than the real world. And so my what I want to get to is just that if aliens had come down and they were doing to this planet what this culture is doing to the planet, we would not be responding the way we are. We would be resisting it for all we're worth.
And together,
And
as a
together,
collective.
as a collective, I completely agree.
Mm-hmm.
We would, and so what I want for us to do is to transfer our loyalty away from this culture and to the real world. And once
Yes.
you do that, then everything else starts to fall into place.
Okay, we're going a little over, but
Okay.
explain to everybody what the real world is. I mean, we're not over an hour yet. I just want to leave some time for questions, but explain your real world because I think you have the best example of the real world or the best idea of what the real world is.
The real world is white pine trees and ponderosa pine trees and black bears and grizzly bears and you and me. It's not our social structures. It's not our belief systems. And yes, our belief systems affect the real world, and belief systems are important, but what's always most important is what is real, and we have to build up our belief systems based on what's real. And what's real, again, are the interactions in the soil. What's real are the bacteria who support all of life. What's real are the interactions between the trees and the interactions between the trees and birds. What's real? What's real is this, is my flesh and your flesh. That's what's real.
Yeah, everything, environment, natural. Okay, so let's get into the comments and questions so we can go through as many of them as we can in what time is remaining. Honestly, I'm sure everybody here would love to spend 2-3 hours talking to you. Okay, I'm going to shut up now and read the question and comments. Okay, human, we need to claim 20 facts to repeat until everyone knows them. The facts speak for themselves. That's kind of good. Repetitive is important. What do you think about that? Just have 20 facts that we can just repeat and get together on.
I think that facts are really important, and I think that facts are, as a writer especially, facts are everything. I believe with Andrea Dworkin that as a writer it is one's sacred task to tell the truth as one understands it to be, to articulate the things that one knows in one's heart are true, and to help others to articulate those things. The only hesitation I have on this is, and I completely agree that we need to have facts that we can discuss. The hesitation I have is that I'm not entirely sure that statements of facts actually affect public discourse, because I think a lot of public discourse is so crazy that I'm not convinced that facts always matter, which doesn't alter the fact I still write books based on facts. But it's a huge question. I mean, if I believe that it is fundamentally insane to destroy the land base on which you live in order to make money. And one can, okay, here's what I'm trying to say. There's a great line by Upton Sinclair. It's hard to make a man understand something when his job depends on him not understanding it. And likewise, it's hard to make people understand something when their entitlement depends on them not understanding it. And so
Right.
facts are incredibly important, and I do think we need to put them out there and to repeat them, absolutely. And I think we also need to be aware that quite often facts will not win the day. What will win the day is naked power on the part of those who are in power. You can tell them all the facts. You can tell the Nazis all the facts you want about Jews really aren't subhuman, and they're still going to do what they're going to do. So
Right.
anyway, so facts are important, but they're not the end. But don't be disappointed when they don't always work.
Great. I kind of tend to see that. Okay, going south, High Torstein. Could the Green New Deal ever be green sustainable?
I think we have 6,000 years of this entire culture not being sustainable. And, you know, when I think of Iraq, the first thing I think of is not cedar forest so thick that sunlight never touches the ground, which is what Iraq was prior to the beginnings of this culture. And the Arabian Peninsula was oak savanna. And the Near East was heavily forested. Greece was heavily forested. North Africa was heavily forested. And those have all been cut. There were penguins in, the reason that there aren't any penguins in the Northern Hemisphere is because they were exterminated. They were called great auks, A-U-K-S. And they were in as far south as France, and they were wiped out. And this culture is inherently not sustainable. And I don't believe in the reform versus revolution dichotomy, which means, sure, I'm all for modifications that'll make things slightly less bad, but you can't take an unsustainable culture, tack a few things on, and call it sustainable. So
Right.
are there ways to make this culture less unsustainable than it currently is? Yes. Are there ways to make this culture sustainable? No, because it's exceeded carrying capacity. It's based on mining, which can never be sustainable, et cetera, et cetera. So, so, so no, yeah, it can make things better, but it will not make things sustainable.
And to agree. Okay, Basil Peterson, what percentage of the population is actually understanding our predicament? I don't know if you have the answer, but make a guess. Take a step.
That's a really good question. I've never been asked before. I'm going to give two answers. One of them is 1%. It's 1% who would really get it. But on the other hand, I'm going to say 95%, because I think most people understand that they don't see as many songbirds at the bird feeder as they did when they were a kid. And they don't see insects splattered across the windshield like they did when they were a kid. And everybody except for like sort of land developers understands that hey, that's enough. That's enough. They
Gotta get his word in, or his or her word.
They understand that. I mean, they hate it when there's urban sprawl, and they hate it when there's a new subdivision goes in and destroys the meadow where they played as a child. People understand all that on a visceral level, but then we look at this whole culture and it's like it's so overwhelming, and we ask the question of who's in charge. And the technology and the economy really are in charge over humans. Cities are built for cars, not for human beings, and that's just crazy. Anyway, the point is, I think on a real visceral level, I think most all of us get it. Most all of us understand. And I think most of us, I think about a friend who is a single mother with a couple of children, and she's like, she understands the problems, but understanding the problems does not make it so you don't have to pay rent, and it doesn't resolve. See, that's part of the problem, is that this culture systematically makes us dependent upon the culture itself, like any good abusive system does. The laws of apartheid were really written in order to force subsistence farmers off their land and into the mines, because they needed a workforce. And so they would put in place a dog tax, a hut tax, a poll tax, also that they would force people into the work economy. Another way to say this is, in the 1830s, there was a pro-slavery philosopher in the South wrote to his northern abolitionist buddies saying, look, there are land ownership conditions in which it's in the capitalist's best interest to own slaves or not own slaves. And it's really simple. If there's a lot of land and not many people, the only way you can get people to work for you is at the point of a gun, which means because if there's a lot of land and not many people, they got access to land, which means they got access to food, clothing, and shelter, which means they got access to self-sufficiency. But if you pack all those people in a city, they don't have access to land, which means they don't have access to food, clothing, and shelter, which means that they have to go to work for you, which means it's actually in the capitalist's best interest not to own them, but to pay them whatever pittance. My point being that, yes, a lot of people really understand the analysis, but on a day-to-day process, we have been made dependent upon the very system that is killing the planet. And so we can all go, yeah, the system is killing the planet, but that doesn't alter the fact that at the end of the month, you got to write a check to your landlord. And you got to find a way to make a living to write that check to the landlord.
Right. So, do you think UBI would help that if we did universal basic income? Do you think that would help at all? I mean, a lot of people would probably stay home or not work 2-3 jobs, or, they just wouldn't be as dependent on everything.
Sure, I think that would help. Would it help Western bluebirds? Not particularly. No. And that's always the question too. Would it help? Would it help the non-humans? So sure, given a choice between capitalism as we see it and universal basic income, sure, I would go for universal basic income. But again, that's not really going to help Koa salmon.
Yeah, I know. That is horrible. Okay, so let's see, Adam Thomas, how do we change the face of recycling as we know it? Oh my gosh, we have 4 minutes to get through questions. Go ahead.
I would say that you remember back in the late 60s, early 70s when they first came up with this, it was actually 3 words: reduce, reuse, and recycle.
Hmm.
And the first two kind of got tossed by the side. And the reason the first two got tossed by the side is because they don't help capitalism.
Right.
Using and reusing don't help capitalism at all. But recycling is a huge industry that, in fact, does aid capitalism, which is why it's the one that gets all the press. So if I were going to change the face of recycling, the first thing I would do is put it back to where it should be, which is number 3 after reduce and reuse. And the other thing that I would do is I would, like always, talk about what goes into it. That, as you said earlier, there are tremendous inputs of energy that go into recycling metals, for example. And there are also, it's a tremendously toxic process. And
Right.
if we're going to talk about recycling, we need to talk about that. Or we need to talk about the fact that the reason that China quit accepting a lot of the recyclables from the United States is because most of it was trash. And it was
Right.
an outsourcing of the trash problem from the US to China.
And
Um,
there's a huge pile of it in Malaysia too.
yeah. And I mean, the real solution to recycling plastic, for example, is to not make any.
Hmm.
Um, one of the ways I think about this that's kind of funny is we always think, oh, wouldn't that be great if some bacteria evolved to sort of could eat plastic, or some fungus evolved that it could eat plastic.
Isn't there something that's doing that? Or
Well, there are, like, I have actually some containers full of mealworms, because mealworms can digest plastic, and I think it's kind of fun to feed them styrofoam and to watch them eat it. But the point is that uh, the we can know that all the talk about any concern about plastic trash is bogus, because think about what would happen a uh, if a bacteria evolved that was quickly eating plastic. We would freak out really quickly, because it wouldn't just be eating the bad plastic, it would also be eating the laptop, and it would be eating our glasses frames, and it would
that would be good. Don't do that. I need mine.
out, and we would develop something else. That, I mean, that's the thing, is that the reason plastic is so useful to us is because it doesn't decay. Another word for doesn't decay is nobody eats it.
Right.
And you
Right.
create something that nobody eats and expect for it to not be a problem.
Do you remember when you used to take back the pop bottles? I mean, wasn't that more like that's reusing rather than recycling, as much recycling, because you
Definitely.
reuse them?
And that is that's a much better idea that way. You know, one can make arguments that plastic. Here's part of the problem, is that when you stay within the system, you end up making some crazy arguments. For example, plastic is less harmful than glass because plastic is so much more lightweight, which means that when you transport it from Atlanta, Georgia to Minneapolis, Minnesota, you're using less energy than you would if you were transporting glass pop bottles. But then there's the question of whether either one is sustainable, and of course, neither one is.
Right. Well, the real answer is we need to have fewer people on the planet, and we need to start living a different, entirely different lifestyle than we are now.
Yeah, agree.
So, but that's, you're not going to get culture to change. And that's the hard part,
Which is
because
why.
I would go with it. I don't care. I would rather have that and have the wildlife than.
Well, that's exactly why I wrote Endgame. The premise of Endgame, the fundamental premise of Endgame, is: do you believe that this culture will undergo a voluntary transformation to a sane and sustainable way of living? And I've asked thousands and thousands of people that question, and nobody has ever said yes. Nobody believes this culture is going to undergo a voluntary transformation to a sane
No.
and sustainable way of living. So the next question is: if you don't believe the culture is going to undergo a voluntary transformation to a sane and sustainable way of living, and you care about the natural world, what does this mean for your strategy and for your tactics? And the answer is we don't know. And the reason we don't know is because we don't talk about it. And the reason we don't talk about it is because we're all so busy pretending that we have hope that there's going to be some miracle transformation that we all know is not going to happen. So instead, what I'm really interested in is, if you don't believe that there's going to be a voluntary transformation, and if you do care about the natural world, then what does that mean you should do? And of course, a lot of people will say, well, so shoot, if you don't believe there's going to be a voluntary transformation, that means you should just kill yourself. Well, that's crazy. That's not an answer. The real answer is we should act as though the planet matters, and we should build a resistance movement to act in defense of the natural world and to act as with our loyalty to the natural world and to take down this culture that is killing the planet before it does succeed in killing everything that lives.
Right. And it's heading that way, sadly. But at this moment, I think we're better off trying everything we can to save what we have left. As that's why I love Deanna Meyer so much. We need to fight like hell for everything we have left. And I really love that sentiment, that attitude. And I think that's what we need to focus on as much as possible. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Hold on.
as I said earlier, find what you love and then defend your beloved. So
Mhm.
if you love Western bluebirds, they're under assault, and do whatever you can to defend them. If you love cyanide millipedes, they're under assault. Do what you can to defend them. If you love Delnor salamanders,
Right.
it doesn't matter. If you love discourse is under assault. If which I'm presuming, I don't know you before today, but I'm presuming that that's one of the reasons you started this program is because discourse itself is under assault.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's great. That's
It's
wonderful.
bought. It's bought. It's pretty much people with power get to buy the message that everybody hears and call it news.
Right.
So yeah, that's exactly the reason I did this. Yeah.
And that's what people need to do is, and individually, I love oh gosh, I feel so bad because I love this person and I love her work, and now I'm blanking on her name. She's this great philosopher out of Oregon State, Kathleen Dean Moore.
Hmm.
Kathleen Dean Moore has this great thing where if you ask her, what can one person do? She always responds, don't be one person. And what she is organize, work.
I can't organize, but
Well, but I noticed that there's not just you, but there's also the engineer, so you're
yeah,
working collectively with somebody and you're working
yeah.
today, and we can do what we can individually, we can do what we can collectively,
I
but
can network. That's different. That's to me, that's different.
the point is that again, we need to realize that this is not some computer game that if we mess up, we can just go back to the last time we saved and move forward again. Instead,
Mhm.
it's really life on the planet we're talking about, and we need to act as though it's real.
Right. Because it very much is real. It's real, real, real. Okay. Oh, it's 4:04. I don't know how anxious you are to get out. I don't see, I just have comments. Looks like they're talking to each other. You mind if I just give a shout out to the peeps that are on here? Because they're awesome. I like to say hi when they're here. So Sandy is here, Environmental Coffee House. She is awesome. Book Hermit, always good to see you here. Even though you don't believe in the climate thing, that's cool. We're on the same page on most everything else. Bio, thank you for showing up. Human, of course, my favorite moderator. Well, Sama. I don't want to offend Osama because I love Osama too. Basil, thank you for being here. Anthony Reyes, always cool to see you here. Circle the Wagons, you too. Thank you for coming. Let's see, hopefully I didn't miss Jeffrey Pearson. Thanks for showing up. I hope you're not just barely getting here because we're about done. And Gazar, my favorite grumpy old man. So just no offense. Thank you. And sorry. Okay, guys. If I missed you, I'm sorry. Oh, my phone won't turn over anymore. Okay. So anyway, I just want to thank our guest and let you know that I am coming back on it in 2 hours with John Halstead. So if you want to come back and join me then, that would be fantastic. I know 2 in 1 day is a lot, but it's hard for me too. I'm just going to be out of town a lot next couple weeks. So I had to do what I have to do. Anyway, hang out for just a second if you can, Derrick. I want to talk to you after. Just let me say goodbye to everybody. You guys have a very good one, and we will talk to you soon.